no idea where our conversation is going to go. And we jump on a call and straight, like it's just straight in, and it just takes my energy from here to here.
Mm.
And I'm
Same.
literally
The wiggle in
wiggling
the
in my
chair.
chair.
The
Yep.
wiggling in the chair.
The
Love it.
wiggling in the chair with excitement. Love it. It lifts my energy, Dave. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle.
Wiggle, wiggle,
Hey
wiggle, wiggle,
guys,
wiggle.
it's Dr. Ash. Welcome to another episode of the Remind podcast. That wiggle in the chair is going to make a whole lot more sense very soon because Dave and I just had a really, really deep off camera chat, which has led us to what we're going to record about today. So, what we're
Mm.
chatting about today is all about values and culture. And this is relevant to every context of life, whether it's our family, whether it's our workplace. It literally doesn't matter, even in our
Mm.
relationships. But I had a huge breakthrough in this area last week, and Dave and I were chatting about it, and I got so like into it and so worked up and so excited about it. I literally got the wiggle in my chair happening. So we're super excited to share this with you today and see where the conversation goes because I know that it's going to bring massive revelation to you in your life as well. So,
Mm. And
Dave,
I tell you what, when we first started talking, I'm just going to put this out. We've been talking for about 40 minutes before we hit record, and both of us came in just a little bit more sluggish than we normally
yeah, a
are.
bit low.
And then I heard the story, and then we sort of from there decided let's talk about it further. But yes, we're going to be talking about values. We're going to be talking about sort of culture, those type of things within, and I think we can talk about it in a broad context, but how about we just sort of narrow it down to maybe workplace or situations where you have relationships with people. It's a fairly, you don't really want to think about too hard, but you do have deep relationships with these people because you're generally working with them every day. But you have to.
Absolutely.
And it's not like
Yeah.
would you necessarily choose them as a partner? Would you choose them as family or all of those things? Maybe sometimes yes, maybe sometimes not. And so it's navigating
Yeah.
how do we do this? And then a lot of companies now have values outside of mission statements and all of that, or maybe they actually incorporate the values into the mission statements
Yep.
because what they're trying to do is to help people create a culture, because it's not just the
A
CEO's
culture.
responsibility, it's not just the owner's responsibility, it's a collective
Oh,
responsibility.
even that's going to grind people.
It's a collective
Even that, I
responsibility.
think, is going to grind people.
Well, let's
So
just
many
let
employees,
let's
I
think just
feel, so many employees think it's the business's responsibility to uphold values for them, not their responsibility to also uphold the values and live those values for the collective.
well, what's the definition of culture? Because I heard this
Oh, gosh.
from a massive multinational, right? Culture is
Yeah.
how we as individuals interact with each other and the world. It's a collective thing, right?
Ooh,
So
write
that
that down. Culture.
by definition, culture is not just the one person's responsibility. It's culture by itself
Yeah,
is
it's the
how
collective.
individuals collectively operate, how they collectively interact
Yeah.
with each other. So it's sort of
Oh my
like,
gosh.
by definition, it can't be one person because either you will live and die by the behaviour of the CEO. Now, yes, that can happen in a business, especially when it comes to being agile and business decisions, and everyone knows what it's like to
Yeah.
work under a toxic leader. But
Yeah.
what is culture and how are we
I love
responsible?
that because, yes, I love that because in my work, and again, it doesn't matter if we're talking about romantic relationships, parents and children, if we're talking about friendships, if we're talking
Mm.
about leaders and their teams, it doesn't matter who it is, but whenever you get two or more people trying to interact in a dynamic, you've got to understand that my exterior that I'm presenting to the world is going to be created based upon all of my past experiences.
Mm.
Now, if I have a wound around being dumb and
Ooh.
you
Yep.
don't know my history, but
Mm.
you make a comment, or maybe you choose to not take my idea. Maybe,
Mm.
the best idea is that's going to be most aligned with the mission of the business or the vision of the business is someone else's idea. But all of a sudden, because I have a story, I have a wound that I believe I'm dumb, that wound is activated and that wound comes to the surface. And all of a sudden, I start behaving differently. I get sullen and go within. I isolate myself. I might shut down. I might start behaving differently to the team. I might even start playing, like acting out towards the person whose idea did get chosen. So as soon as you start understanding that every single person in your sphere has wounds, you can't escape that. And it's whether or not they have the self-awareness and whether or not they have the tools to be able to reflect on their wounding and also, I guess, participate in the healthy processing of that. Healthy, like coming together of that. Because culture isn't going to always be smooth sailing. I teach this stuff and every single person in my whole team has been through Rise and Thrive. They're amazing humans, but we are all different. We all have our different unique ways of working. We all have our unique zone of genius. Some of us are absolute go-getters that just get stuff done. Others are big visionaries. Others are super, super aware. Others are not so aware. But it all comes together. What makes culture work is whether or not we can have awareness of our own wounding and how that's playing out in the collective. So I had a massive blow up recently. Thank goodness my team are so gracious and forgiving. But where this came from for me was recognizing that in that moment, I wasn't this conscious leader. I wasn't the one leading this, living the values and leading this amazing culture and amazing team, because I had regressed to the level of an animal. I was in full-blown survival mode. Like a dog showing their teeth. I just had this picture in my head of a dog just growling, showing its teeth, going, I am feeling threatened. My nervous system is on fire. If you come near me, I'm going to tear your face off. I'm going to like literally eat you alive. That was the level that I had regressed to because the overwhelm and the capacity of my nervous system had been fully exceeded. And so through pressures within the business and within our team, I kind of exploded. The beautiful thing about this was about being able to reflect and go, okay, first of all, what was it in me that let that get to that point? What was it in the individual team members that missed the fact that I was showing my teeth and they continued to come? Like, where's the dynamic here, and where is the failure in communication? Where is the failure in systems? Where is the failure in processes? It's the first time ever we've ever experienced that. And it was so powerful.
Damn. And I love the fact that you sort of talked about at the start that it could be, people around you are wounded. And I'm going to sort of say, look in the mirror, that person's wounded as well. And when you get to
We
a
all
level
are,
of...
totally.
Absolutely. And as you go through the healing process, it doesn't stop that wound from you not feeling that wound. It's just that the higher the level of healing, the more awareness comes to it, so you can be slightly more observational to it, but you still feel it. Now, I'm wondering in the
I
future...
think it depends on that.
Well, I mean, in the future, right? Once you've healed something to a point where you fully accept it, you can see it and maybe there's zero reaction to it.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of looking at it as a scale. But what we're sort of talking
Yeah.
about is this sort of like trigger point, okay? I've said something that's triggered you. Then you sort of talked about what happened to you, which wasn't necessarily a massive trigger. It was this slow burn of overwhelm. And if anyone's been following Ash for the last, little bit on her socials, there's been a lot of change when it comes to technology. And so it's just been the amount of work and overload and all of that. And it got me thinking, you just have this person that you work with, right? and they're always busy, they're always working, they're always doing these things, and they put a smile on their face and they seem like they've got it together, and then one day they don't. Or they're doing their job, nothing's really changed, but you say something and they have a overreaction in your view.
There's that snap moment.
Yeah, and again, it may not be just from one major sort of something that's been triggered, nervous system goes berserk, and then off they go. It could be, like you're saying, this slow burn of overwhelm, this sort of layer and layer and layer and layer and layer, and it just sort of creeps up on
Yep.
you. And maybe the trigger behind that, or the hurt behind that, is that I'm not enough, so I have to do everything for everyone because I need to see that validation. That could be it, if you want to talk about that. However, it could just be out of nowhere, or perceived to be out of nowhere. And where does this all come from? Or like you were saying before, how do we stop that? How do we get ourselves from there? Or how do we get ourselves to there? It's really going to be about that awareness. It's sort of like,
Yeah.
am I taking on too much? Because you'll feel it in your body. Like I know for me, when I know I've had enough or things are getting overwhelmed, I have to rely more and more on technological support to remind me to do things. When I'm on fire,
Yes.
I don't need the reminders. So
Yeah.
there's a trigger. And then
But even with our podcast, right? Like 90% of the time when you're firing on all cylinders, we don't need reminders. You just know. It's in the calendar, it's
done.
happening. But sometimes when there's a million other things happening in your world, we might miss one.
Oops.
You might miss that
Ash
it's in the calendar.
Ash gets
And so,
a five
so
minute warning. Sorry, can't do it with 5 minutes before it's supposed
sorry,
to. Yeah.
can't do it. But what have I started doing, Dave?
Yeah. The
What did you get yesterday?
I got a text message saying, just a reminder,
A
we are
text
recording.
message
Yeah.
that was scheduled when we booked it. Because I had a million things happening in my mind. I wouldn't have been
Mm.
thinking yesterday, oh, I'm just going to love Dave well by giving him a heads up about tomorrow.
Hmm.
I was in the frequency of booking it then and there. I knew what's a system and process that can love Dave well, that can
Mm.
give him that heads up and get it back into the front of his mind with the million other things that live there,
Mm.
so that you don't end up being, stuck somewhere, out somewhere, and then feeling like you've let someone down when you haven't let
Mm.
anyone down. It's been a system or process that hasn't supported you to succeed.
Mm.
And so I think I said in the message, this is like a
The
today, Ash,
Friday Ash. Yeah. It must have been the day
lo-
you scheduled it. Yeah.
loving, loving
Yeah.
future Ash well, sending this to you. So I'll see you tomorrow. And then I get a text back because it automatically sends, right? I am
Mm.
not even, it's not even in my awareness that that has gone. But then I get this message back saying, see you tomorrow with a smiley face. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, yay. That's so nice. But I've learned that systems and processes can set us up for success or failure.
Well,
And if
they
someone
can
is,
support. They can support for
yeah,
sure.
absolutely. But they can support our failure too.
Mm.
And they can support our successes. And when I looked at me losing the plot last week, and I literally debriefed, this is the most valuable process I would say to every single human being on the planet. If something hasn't gone the way you want it to go, create some time and space to sit back and go, what
Mm.
were the things that in the lead up to that got me there? Because if I am not willing to see what got me there, I can't learn from it. I'm just going to keep
Mm.
repeating the same thing and the same thing and the same thing, doing the same thing, and continuing to be disappointed by the result. But also, if something has gone really well,
Mm.
what got you there? Debrief that too. And so when we debriefed me getting to this explosion point, which is super unlike me, but when we debriefed it, we looked at the fact that we didn't have any communication in place, like a handle with care. You know,
Yeah.
I'm a high performer. I am always on and I'm here. And so on a day when I'm here, everyone else around me continues to have this unconscious expectation of me being here.
Hmm.
And it's my responsibility for me to manage their expectation and let them know, hey guys, I'm here today. I don't have that capacity today. I'm here.
Hmm.
I need you to tread lightly. I need you to be gentle. I need you to be gracious and patient. I'm not going to be getting the things to you that you expect me to get to you. I'm not going to be getting things done. I'm not going to be as responsive on messages. I'm here. But
Hmm.
that's my responsibility to communicate that. But we didn't have a system and process in place to do that. Now we do.
But
And
I
there was a
think,
whole series of
yeah.
things.
But you said systems are important, and I agree. They support communication. Without that, it's over. If you can't communicate it, no systems, no other support's really going to work. It's that
Yeah.
communication, and it's difficult in a workplace because a lot of the stuff that you and I talk about is about healing yourself, having deep and meaningful relationships with your family, loved ones, friends. It's being vulnerable. Now, let's take that theory of communication and vulnerability and put it into a workplace. And suddenly it's sort of like, so
Hmm.
you want me to swim with sharks? Is that what you want me to do? Right? Because there's going to be that apprehension, right? You want me to open up
Yep.
and be vulnerable and communicate to people? Well, I don't want you to. You need to judge exactly how vulnerable you're going to be at work because work, you got to judge your environment, right? Because if you are
Yeah.
necessarily
And there's
swimming with
also an
sharks,
identity.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and here's the thing: if it's a true value to always be your authentic self, then it is your identity is your identity, whether you're doing X, Y, or Z. So,
Yes, but
and
that's not lived. Like so few people actually are
it's
there.
challenging. It's challenging again because they will
So
sometimes feel they're
challenging.
swimming with sharks. Like
Yeah.
it's great to be gracious. It's great to be
So
loving, but you put yourself in
when you say
danger.
swimming with sharks, can you help me understand what you mean by that? Is it that you're
Well,
in unsafe waters?
unsafe waters, yes, absolutely. Because
Yeah.
when you're at work,
Yeah.
there is going to be at some level a sense of competition. There's going to be at some level a sense of hierarchy, right? And now
Yep.
it might be a little bit, there might be a soupçon of it, or it could be just it's absolutely there, every person for
Yep.
themselves, and you're going for that job that someone else is going for, or you got that job that someone else wants, and so they want to take you down.
Yep.
I mean, this is, I do believe that this type of culture is on its way out as a whole, but I
Yes.
still do believe it does exist in some way. On top of people working through, as in they are being productive through their traumas. It's sort of like,
Yes.
imposter syndrome, or I'm never heard. It's not
Hmm.
enough. I need to be,
A desire
um,
to be seen, a desire to prove themselves, to prove their worth, to
and
100%.
and so to be able to be vulnerable in a one-on-one connection with your partner, with your family, there's a bit more sort of safety and security in the most part. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions, but in the workplace, like it's in the word. It's a workplace. So you're there to work. You're there by agreement, and the transaction is I will give you my time, skill, talent, and attention for your money. That's the transaction, right? That's the
Yes.
implied. Now we are becoming a lot more aware, and there's a lot more creative, conscious workplaces which is coming, and damn am I here for
Yes.
that. However, we still have a
100%.
very big portion of things that are going to be coming through that aren't there yet. So what we're probably
Hmm.
talking to is where do we mostly need the values and the culture change? Well, it's not necessarily heavily focused on the conscious aware workplaces where they're trying to bring that in, even though it's still relevant. The biggest help is needed is in the old corporate. And so swimming with sharks. I mean, we've all felt
Yeah.
it,
And it's
haven't we?
really interesting. As you say that, it's really interesting because obviously my background was tertiary ed and you've worked in big corporates. And
Mm-hmm.
something that I have been reflecting on lately is the difference between like a publicly listed company versus a private company or a small
Mm,
business. Because a publicly listed company is accountable to their shareholders, and their
yes.
shareholders only care about the bottom line. That's it. It's
Yeah.
driven. It's literally driven by money.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very, very hard to have a safe water to swim in when money is the highest priority over people, over culture, over values, over safety, over anything else. Whereas in a private company that's not necessarily driven by, the stock market,
Yeah.
and the performance I mean, obviously every business is focused on performance and profitability and generating revenue and
Mm-hmm.
making sound financial decisions and all that sort of stuff, but it's a different level of pressure. The board of a publicly listed company has a whole other level of pressure for shareholders and the performance in that space. I have been challenged recently to think, if I were to want to make a difference somewhere, where can I make a difference? And actually, the capacity to make a difference in those publicly listed companies is really limited, because even if I work with the leaders, even if I work with the
Mm.
team, the system that it operates within is shark waters.
Mm.
It's not safe. And so I kind of saw it as like, it didn't feel right in my spirit, because it's like gaslighting an abuser. Gaslighting someone who is a victim of abuse by saying, here, let me just help you to feel better about the abuse that you're receiving.
Interesting
Because the
take.
system is so systemically broken and so toxic that the top down abuse still happens, that the
Mm.
absolute overwork, underpay, relentless pursuit of profitability and profit margins is always going to be the priority above and beyond them and their well-being. And that is a really big overarching blanket statement, and I'm certain them, or at least I hope, that there are some publicly listed companies out there that don't fit the bill and that really do
Mm.
genuinely prioritize their people. But in my experience, having been employed by many and having worked with many, I I haven't seen it, which is why I pretty much will not work with them anymore.
Okay.
Whereas
Well,
even if it's
that's
a
interesting.
medium to
Mm.
largish business, but is private, not publicly listed, the pressure of that stock market isn't there to drive the number one. It's like the love of money is the root of all evil. It comes back to that. They have the capacity to love their people above money,
Mm.
while also having really great profit margins, really great financial success of the business.
Mm. Well, I like what you're saying, and I see that a lot. But the optimist in me sees something else, and I've seen it working for a small business, well, a smaller business that got bought out by a multinational, and I saw it. So whenever there's a stock market involved, whenever there's shares involved, when it comes to like publicly traded, if you are proprietary limited, the basis is you are for profit. That's it. So
Yes.
your intention is it's for profit. So that is the intention that's been put out there. How you get that, and then there's sort of subsections that sort of come down. You can do that in different ways. But one thing that really got me, I suppose, excited for change with these big companies is that the analogy came to me that these big multi corporates, they think of them like a fleet, right? Think of like a
Mm-hmm.
Navy fleet, right? And I'll think of like the US fleet. And you've got the aircraft carrier, you've got the destroyers, you've got the submarine. And have you ever seen those pictures where they're just all together heading in that one direction? It just sort of looks really ominous, right? Think of a
Yeah.
multinational like that. Now think of the work that you can do is you are helping the people on one of those ships. Because one thing I've sort of said is a fleet is made up of ships. And I've
Mm-hmm.
seen in pockets of multinationals just these areas that are just alive with good culture.
Yeah.
Now, yes, they work in that, but what makes that culture different from one ship to another? Well, it's the people in it, and that's the work that you do. So if you could actually sort of infect in a good way, ship by ship by ship by ship, it will get to the fleet, because ultimately there will be a thing where people cost huge amounts of money. So if you're churning
Oh,
people,
absolutely.
it's costing a heap of money. If you can attract the right people, chef's kiss, because you've got that,
Yeah.
you've got synergies. So it's this lack mentality and the scarcity mindset that's been set into corporations and into our economy to keep the poor poor and the rich rich. So
Yeah.
one thing I like about what we're doing is we can take on the bigger ones because they're made of people. And even the shareholders and the directors and the CEOs, they're all people. And it's just, again, if we can just infect in a good way one ship and then another ship
Yep.
and then another one, and then suddenly the commander, the commodore, the chief, the whatever is there going, wow, because the shift is naturally happening organically. And I don't think that with people awakening, with people becoming more conscious, that there is going to be this continued focus on the lack mindset. There's an awareness of an abundance mindset. What does that mean? Am I being delusional? All of that, we're working through it. So
100%. I think that
it's,
coming from the bottom up is going to take a lot of time. I don't think we'll see it in our generation, maybe not even our kids. But this is where, and I love that you said that, because in those real systemic things, it has got to come from the top. And so what I'm saying is quite often the top has no interest in changing. The top is the top. They're going to keep rolling out this. They're going to keep the same ecosystem, but they're going to tick the boxes to say, yep, look, we looked after our people. But if their
yeah,
people turn around as a result of being more authentic and as a result of actually engaging in self-care practices where they say no to things, they set healthy boundaries, they uphold what they're worthy of in terms of actual, well, not fairness, not equality, what is it? Like actually just being loved well and emotionally and psychologically safe in their workplace at the bare minimum, which means we cannot be overloading their workload and expecting that that is repeatedly okay when the cost of that is their family, their hobbies, the things that make them them. And so many ecosystems are like that. So what it really excites me, and this is probably about 18 months ago, when I had this vision of, for me personally, I don't work really with one-on-one clients anymore unless they are at that top of the ecosystem. The reason being, me working with a one-on-one client at the bottom of the ecosystem does nothing to help the collective. It helps their collective, the ripple effects from them down, which is really important to me. But the top of that ecosystem, the really high level executives, the decision makers, the CEOs, the ones who got there in that toxic system because they are experts at toxic systems because their trauma made them that way. Their trauma got them to the top of the ecosystem. They are so cutthroat. They are so, driven to, it might be to prove themselves. It might be to, what are the other reasons? Honestly, the main reason is to be seen, heard, and understood. The main reason is to prove that they're worthy. The main reason is validation and acceptance from their parents
well, it's
or
also
from
just,
someone they care
it could
about.
be just the identity, because if you go back and you look at all of the top heads of the multinationals, they're not young. And so they've been raised by their parents who got been raised by their parents, and it was in a culture of to be successful, work hard, be
Yeah,
successful, be a good person, of which I guarantee
that's
they tick all the boxes. Maybe some of them don't, but but in their own mind, they probably think that I'm a good person. I work hard, and I deserve this because of everything I've been through, and it wouldn't have come easy to them. So it's this environment is been like, for them to get there is survival. But yes, they're very good at the current game. Now the game's changing. Now
yes.
I also believe that there's going to be disruption, right? So there's one way you can change. There's a trickle up effect or the trickle down effect, whichever way you want to call it. But there's disruptors, and when disruptors come in,
Yep.
everything gets turned on its head real quick. And so as these big
Yeah. COVID, I
multinationals,
think, was a huge disruptor
oh
that
yeah,
really shook a lot of people.
yeah.
After COVID, a lot of people recognized. So I was still working at the uni when COVID hit.
Mm.
And in the period of COVID slash post COVID, I remember there were at one stage 14 jobs being advertised in one of the departments because people sort of just had this awakening of going, you know what? I don't want to deal
Do
with this.
do I
I'm
enjoy my
out.
job?
I know
Yeah.
people who took $40,000 pay cuts just to get out of the system.
Wow.
That's like
Mm.
insane.
Mm.
But COVID really, for a lot of people, awakened them to what's really important here. What really matters to you. What do you want to continue to get out of bed for and strive for? And what I mean, a lot of people had time at home with their families, with their kids,
Mm.
and actually, that's one of the things that I don't know if it was in a podcast episode or if it was with someone else, but we were talking recently about how I went to conferences and I would sit there and I'd look at all these people who were the
Yeah.
top of their field, basically like my idols, and they were alone. They had really nothing else apart from their massive success and contribution to their field and their careers.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
made the decision that I didn't want to do that. And what I see is that you're right. The people who reach the top of that, I'm not being sexist here. I'm being real. The majority are men. The majority are baby boomer generation at the moment.
Mm.
So that age range of that group. Now, if you look at their personal relationships, most of them will have a very, very disconnected, unhappy, or absent
Mm.
relationship. Most of them will have disconnected children who basically are just as dysfunctional with not feeling seen, not feeling heard, having to prove themselves, and all these kinds of things. Most of them will have significant health problems. Most of them will have at least one kind of addiction, whether that's cocaine, sex, porn, whether that is often it's their work that's their addiction,
Mm.
whether it's cocaine is one of the most common ones. And why is that? Because the only way they can keep going and the only way they can continue to be the version of themselves that they know is if they numb themselves out to the experience of the isolation of not knowing who they really are, not
Mm.
feeling worthy of the oxygen they're breathing unless they're performing at that level. And what
Yeah.
I've
Wow.
found is that when you can take that one person who is at the top, who is responsible for this whole framework of toxicity and dysfunction, and you can connect that person to their purpose, connect that person to their sense of self, their personal relationships improve, their health improves, their addictions fall away, but then the culture and what becomes really important to them and the impact of that, money cannot buy that.
Mm.
And that trickles down and continues to have those flow on effects from the
That's
people
that's that's if
at the
they
lower
stay in the
level.
same job, because chances are, if you have to numb yourself to be in that job, you're being drawn to somewhere else. So you connect with your purpose, then you
Well,
realize, oh,
potentially,
I mean, it's
it's
a
the
big
difference
thing.
is the why.
Mm.
So the difference is the why. And I even just had this conversation with a client recently who, is very successful. The difference is the why. It's not that this person wanted to change what they were doing. It's connecting them to their sense of self and understanding why am I doing this? Because
Mm.
like a huge company who is doing it for constantly pushing towards profits and constantly wanting to get bigger and bigger and bigger so that I can feel more and more and more significant, it doesn't mean to say that the vehicle is wrong. It doesn't mean to say
Mm.
that what they're doing is wrong. But when they can connect to their why and they can go, oh my gosh, by us getting bigger and bigger, it's got nothing to do with me anymore. It's actually got to do with who do we serve? Like for Remind, I have no interest in Remind being a, multi-million dollar or billion-dollar company because of what it gives me. But if we reached multi-million and multi-billion dollars, the people that have been impacted as a product of that
Mm.
is astronomical. And then when we have someone connected to their purpose, they don't just want to, bulk keep cash and sit there and crane a car into the top apartment of their building in Melbourne.
Oh, that was very targeted now,
The
wasn't
money,
it? I
I mean,
believe it
not
was.
being specific
I
at
believe
all,
it was a
but that's
McLaren
a
Senna
perfect
as well.
example,
If we want
right?
to be specific, it was a McLaren Senna that was craned into
It was.
said apartment. Yes.
But there comes a point where you just go, this amount of money is stupid, like actually. And what is the impact if we stewarded those finances and connected to why are we here and what sets my soul on fire really, if it's not just money and cars and insane houses and, whatever it is, mega yachts and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If we stewarded those finances to a purpose, if we stewarded those finances as a collective, the difference that that makes in the world, the difference that that makes to generations to come, people bang on about, climate change and wanting to leave a better world for our kids. How about we leave better kids for our world? And we probably wouldn't have to worry about any of
Or
that stuff.
both. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And
I just had a massive rant.
you did. You did. And look, no hate to people that are successful that are baby boomers, because going back to how the baby boomers were raised, they were raised by parents who lived through war, if not were in it.
Totally.
And so
From a survival
it's
perspective, it makes sense.
and yes, the boomers enjoyed an incredible economic uplift, which was post-war. And so, but what that economy was and what it is now, it's very much changing. It was great when you sort of get into like 50s, 60s, 70s. 80s was probably like the peak of greed is good. And then it's sort of, then you had the dot-com bubble, and then you've had all of that. And now we're getting to the point where there's just a massive disparity between earning and housing and all of these things. So you can kind of see that style of economy has had its run, and it's getting to a point now where it's just bringing a very big divide between the haves and have-nots. It doesn't mean that these people are at fault. It's just this is a can that's being kicked down the road to a point where it's now going to have to sort of stop. But I would say if we get back to like the values and culture, because I know we sort of started off with it, we sort of went for a little walk through a garden of,
Typical Ash and Dave. We went down a
yeah.
rabbit hole.
And let's sort of come back to, and I think you raised it before we started, it's values and culture in the workplace. Now, I know most people will have a value. Some people write it down. Some people it's just sort of expected. It's just sort of implied. And there's healthy values and unhealthy values, which I thought when you mentioned that before we started, I really liked that. And let's talk to that. And then the next thing I want to talk to is especially my experiences where I thought I was living the values, but I simply wasn't. There was always another agenda sort of masking. So let's talk about some of the healthy values. I mean, for me, it's honest communication and where you feel comfortable, honest communication. Like honest, because to you know what connects those two things, honest communication, in the middle of the bridge is that it's vulnerability. Vulnerability.
Oh yeah, vulnerability. And vulnerability requires safety. You can't have that in in the shark waters.
Yeah, but I mean, I think if you have communication, like honest communication, which is bridged with vulnerability, because vulnerability will sort of throttle how deep we're going. It's sort of like, I feel triggered. That's honest communication. I feel triggered because you're doing this. That's a little bit deeper down. And now at the pit of it, I feel triggered because you've done this, and what it's done is actually really triggered within me imposter syndrome or something like that. There's this sort of throttling.
Yeah, of what it brought up for me.
Exactly.
Yes,
Where
I
all
love
of them
that.
are honest communication, right? So for me, if you had that, then that is for me an absolute cornerstone of values. And if everyone did that, oof.
Well, values are really interesting, and this kind of came up in a different context this week. But you got to understand, like, I literally have a tattoo on my foot that says honest, reliable, trustworthy. And I got that tattoo on my foot because I was raised in a home where my dad highly valued honest, reliable, trustworthy. He used to call it HRT, HRT, HRT. He didn't even have to really say anything to me as I got older except HRT, and that course corrected my behavior or my words or whatever it was. Now, that sounds really good, except I learned that in, for instance, honesty, I inherited that value from my dad without really understanding or battle testing it, right? So if someone lied, I'd be like, you're dead to me. You just, nah, no second chance. That's it. We're done. You lied to me. That is a non-negotiable. It's my value. It's
Out
done,
comes the
right?
sword. Shoo.
Exactly. Yep. And so we use values as a chopping block. And so there's two main ways I see we get values. One is we inherit them from our childhood. In that case, this was what was important to my parents, and so it became important to me because kind of like my safety depended on it. If I lied to my dad, he'd kick my butt. So honesty became really integral to my safety because I needed to be safe in order. I needed to be honest in order to be safe. And the same with reliable, right? Now I grew up with reliable as your word is your bond. You do what you say you will do. But
Yeah.
in
Okay.
that, there's no space for capacity. This capacity conversation again, right? Now I might say I'm going to do this, but only have capacity for this when the time comes. And because of the value of reliable, I'm going to absolutely punish myself. I'm going to absolutely abuse myself so that I can be reliable because I can't possibly let someone down. My word is my bond. I said I'd do it. I can't go back on it. Even if I'm freaking dying, I literally can't go back on it. And
Good old
so
reliable Ash.
re- reliable actually was dysfunctional for me. And so I had to sit with, well, what does this actually mean in a healthy way? And then trustworthy. I mean, I think that's a pretty good value. But what this looks like is that those are the inherited values from my childhood that, well, my parents passed down to me and I just took on. Now, they are super dysfunctional in that rigid black and white state. So if
Yeah.
someone lies to me, you're dead to me, that's it, we're done. If my circumstance changes and all of a sudden I can't do the thing, it's going to eat me alive because all of a sudden I'm unreliable and I'm not in integrity with my values. Instead of being able to have that open, honest conversation and saying, hey, this is really important to me, my circumstances changed, I can't do that, or can we do this instead, or whatever it might be. So it comes as a temperature instead of a thermometer. So then the other way that I see it is people create values when we experience hurt or pain. And I'll give you an example of that. Let's say that if someone had been massively abandoned or rejected, that's going to be really painful. It's going to be really hurtful. Abandonment and rejection is like, and isolation is like the deepest wound that we can have as humanity. So if I had been majorly abandoned or rejected, I'm going to start valuing loyalty because loyalty is my survival instinct to avoid being hurt. So if I value loyalty and I'm testing people to test if they're loyal or not, actually what I'm doing is my pain body is going, it really hurts me to be abandoned or rejected. And so if I only recruit people who have proven themselves as loyal, then I won't get hurt. But actually, again, it completely avoids or disregards the fact that people evolve and people change and people grow. And what might be a good fit today doesn't mean to say that we're going to be a good fit in 5 years. And so I used to really struggle with this with my friendships, where I would be the most loyal friend and I would fight for that friendship. I would always be the one pushing communication and organizing catch ups and doing all this stuff because I valued loyalty, because the rejection and abandonment hurt. And so to avoid the
Yeah.
abandonment and rejection, I would overgive and overlove and be the
Mm.
loyal friend. But when other people wouldn't reciprocate that, it would break my heart, because then I'd be kind of going, but you were loyal.
Mm.
And so, what I had to do to navigate that was actually start to battle test that and go, well, what does loyalty actually look like? What does that actually mean? And if I was safe, even if people behaved in the way that they're going to behave, and even if people grew and changed and we grew apart, how can I be safe in that without saying, well, they were disloyal? And that was part of my healing journey and my process. So, if someone has ever been lied to or cheated on and they've been really hurt, guess what? They're going to really value honesty, because
Mm.
honesty is the antidote to not being lied to or cheated on. If someone's been wrongly accused of something or experienced massive unfairness, they're going to value justice, because
Mm.
if there's justice, they don't have to experience the pain of injustice. And so there's this real distinction around, is our value actually just our attempt at protecting ourselves from the hurt or pain or discomfort? Or is it a functional guardrail that is upholding a standard
Mm.
at a higher level? And this is what I found when I working with businesses. They do not understand this in general. So many businesses will say, oh, we value family. And when I sit there and question them on it and go, okay, but what does family mean to your staff? Like, did they grow up in loving, nurturing families that where they were seen, where they were heard, where their opinion mattered? What does family look like to them? Oh gosh, no. That one doesn't even speak to her parents. That one's dysfunctional.
Mm.
They fight every Christmas. There's narcissists there, and there's this and there's that. There's this dysfunction, and you go, so do you want that in your business? And they'll go, no. I'll go, but you're telling them that you value family, and that's what family means to them. That's what family looks like. So
Mm.
if you scrap the family as the value and go, what would we be seeing or hearing if we were a connected family? And like you said, that would be healthy
The values.
communication,
Mm.
authenticity. And so it's the guardrails that say, if we do come within these guardrails, then what does that look like? And like for us at Remind, love is our number one value. Love is at the heart of everything that we do. And if that means that, we've got terms and conditions, we've got legalities in place, if someone cancels their appointment, we've got cancellation policies. But
Mm.
our first response is to love them, is to go, hey, we noticed you didn't show up to your appointment. First of all, we just want to make sure, is everything okay?
Mm.
Do you need something? And you know what? I was on the receiving end of this recently, where my daughter had been sick all night and I had to late cancel out of a Pilates appointment. So huge shout out to For Me Pilates in Sunbury. I had to late cancel. Now they have a cancellation policy. I know the cancellation policy. But I got a text at I think it was 1 minute past the class start time saying, or class end time saying, hey, we noticed you didn't make the booking. Can you let us know, is there extenuating circumstances? Is everything okay? Yada, yada, yada. And obviously it was an automated message sent from their system. And I was able to go, oh my gosh, my daughter was sick all night. She's got an ear infection. There was no chance she was going to let me go. I'm so sorry I couldn't make the class. And they're like, no worries, we'll sort it out. That is a heart-centered business. Whereas if we prioritize the legality, the rigidity of a term and condition and a thing, like
Mm.
we have a cancellation policy, so sorry that your daughter just is sick and, that really sucks, but, here's the policy. There's no person first in that.
Mm.
So it's a harder way to do business. It is. It's a harder way to do relationship. It requires a lot of integrity. It requires a lot of authenticity. It requires a lot of heart. But the goodwill that comes from that, do you think that I am going to go and tell everyone, oh my gosh, I felt so seen and taken care of and so loved and so safe? These guys are amazing. Do business with them. – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – Hey, sorry you missed the class this morning. Your late fee is this, pay it here. Completely different. Do you think I'm going to sit there and go, I'd probably go, you know what, that's fair. I knew what the cancellation policy was, but I'm not going to be going and screaming from the rooftops, hey, these guys are amazing.
Hmm.
It's really different.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I look at when we can nail values, oh my goodness, it changes everything because values then become these are the standard of how we create and how we live this. And just touching on, I said I had a meltdown last week. When I was when our environment was not emotionally and psychologically safe because we didn't have good communication, we didn't have the systems and processes required, we didn't have an emotionally and psychologically safe environment, I went into my animalistic survival state. Disregard the fact that I'm a leader. Underneath the title of leader, I'm a human, I'm an animal. And so I couldn't live the values. Do you think I could love my team well when I was in survival state? No. Do you think it was a safety, which is another one of our values? No, it was unsafe. Do you think there was, what are some of our other values? Authenticity. Do you think that, like, none of those things became possible because I was in an unsafe environment? How can they support? They can help me to come back to safety. And when I'm back at safety, then everything else can come around it. So coming back to culture, it's an everyone responsibility. It is not just leadership, it's not just management, it's everyone's responsibility to go, how can we create a safe water instead of a shark infested water? Because when people can be in their safety, then they have half a chance at actually living in alignment with values.
Hmm.
That's my experience anyway. That's what we learned from it.
Agreed. Agreed. Absolutely agreed. And I think to wrap this up, you've nailed something pretty important that when we've spoken about swimming with sharks, that if you can't feel a way to be your authentic self, if you can't find a way to be your vulnerable self and you want better, then it might be time to find new waters. Um,
Mm,
and that could be difficult, that could be
yeah,
challenging, and all of that, because it might not just be for you. So, but
that's that's gold, Dave. What just came up for me then is so many businesses are screaming saying we can't find staff, we can't find staff, our staff are leaving. There has to be a willingness to look at where are the sharks in your waters.
mm,
There
agreed.
has to be
Mm,
because it's sometimes it's not about pay, especially post COVID. I've seen, like I said, I had colleagues that took $40,000 pay cut just to get out of the shark infested waters.
mm,
Sometimes it's not about pay. I have seen it time and time again where there's only a point where more money will get someone to continue tolerating dysfunction, but over time the money's not worth it. Over time they will choose emotional and psychological safety every
mm.
day of the week. And I
Or
think that's a
passion,
really
fun,
important point.
just being able to feel like you can
Yeah.
be yourself as opposed to walking in, that sort of dread when you're sitting in the car outside work going, do I have to go in? That time when you wake up
Hmm.
going, oh God, I have to go to work. All of that sort of dread,
Yeah.
like how much is that worth? And there's a cost to it. So, and
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. So there's a
mm,
couple of things there, right? So looking at, is it the right place for you? And that could be anything. It could be, is your relationship a shark infested water?
mm,
Is your workplace a shark infested water? And it doesn't mean to say that just because it is currently a shark infested water that you have to leave. You have to recognize that it's shark infested water and be willing to co create healthy water. That means
mm,
both people or all people involved have to be able to recognize that actually this is not a healthy, functional, safe environment. Are you willing to work with me? First of all, are you willing to see it? Second
mm,
of all, are you willing to partner with me to create a healthier, more functional environment? If the
Beautiful.
answer to that is yes, you're in you're
Mm.
absolutely, even if there's sharks, it's safe
You're in the
water.
right. You're in the right
You
place.
can
Yeah.
you can get rid of the sharks.
Mm.
Whereas if it's a no, and if that dysfunction is protected and you say, well, the sharks are here to stay, so, deal with it, that's not a safe. Someone who says, I'm not going to change, I'm not willing to change, I'm not going to do the work, it is what it is, I am how I am,
It's
kind of
always
deal
been
with
that
it.
way.
That is, yeah, yep. Sorry to say it, but your choices are continue to swim with the sharks or go and choose some different water.
Mm. Absolutely. Wow, this has been a big one. I know we say
In
that a
so
lot,
many
but there's
ways.
been a bit of processing there, Ash, as well.
Yep, there has been. I've had some verbal diarrhea and some good processing. Thank you for
Excellent.
my very one-sided kind of therapy.
That's all right. No cancellation fee will be charged for this one. All right, guys.
Oh,
Well, I
that's
hope you
awesome.
enjoyed today's episode. Look, everyone who's watching, I'm very grateful for the work that you're doing already. And I know that sometimes it can be difficult when it comes to sort of merging identities, the one that you are at home, the one you are with your partner, the one you are at work. And I know we focus on sort of
Mm.
the normal relationships and yourself, but keep at it. And just remember, if you did like the content and you got to this far, give us a like, hit the subscribe, and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah,
Bye
you will. Bye,
bye.
guys.